So let's go back to looking at the traits. I'm gonna try to get a little bit more focused here and actually go through things like good and bad traits. Now, it's going to be a little tough to zip through all of these because I don't really have them organized per se in any particular order, aside from these ones are really good, these other ones are really bad, and then the other ones fall in some kind of a scale ranging between the two. But hopefully I can give you an idea of what you would want to do in order to, try and create yourself a good empire. So I'm going to start with good trait picks that are pretty much the best ones you could pick for your starting species. So first up, rapid breeders is a good one. This is probably a trait that you want to have in almost every single one of your empires that you make when you are actually trying to win the game, trying to be successful. Rapid breeders is good because it's plus 15% growth speed for your species across the board, and growth speed is great because the faster your pops grow, the more productive your planets with those pops on them are, and the more productive they are for your entire empire. So rapid breeders is one that I almost always pick when I'm trying to create a min-max empire. I almost always pick it. It only takes one trait point, so it's actually, I think it's kind of cheap, and it is just so incredibly useful. Another really good one, where the heck was it? Wow, I just had a brain fart. I'm trying to remember what it was. Let's see if I can find it again here. Communal. Communal's pretty good. It's not fantastic, but it still falls under the good, kind of tying in with rapid breeders, where the more pops you have, the more productive your planet is, and at the same time, the happier your pops are, the more productive they will be too. So by picking communal and giving them a flat 5% happiness boost across the board at all times, this will make them more productive overall, because happiness actually does affect production, and it decreases the likelihood that you will get things like uprisings from your own native species. Other good ones, I've gone over things like intelligent and the natural science boon ones. The best one out of these is natural engineers. Between the natural physicists, sociologists, and engineers, natural engineers is actually the best of the bunch, because it's strictly what's available in the engineering tree. For starters, you have things like bigger star bases, which allow you to put more starbase modules on your star bases and make your star bases more useful, and essentially can help make your planets be more productive as well. But you also get things like the bigger ships, battleships in particular. So with natural engineers, you can rush to battleships more quickly. You get bigger defense stations more quickly. So like the defense platform, defense station, and the fortress, you can get those more quickly with natural engineers. And another big one is actually strike craft. Strike craft that are equipped on your ships or your defense stations actually offer a bigger bonus to their fleet power than a near equivalent weapon would, say like a medium weapon, or possibly even like a large scale weapon. A lot of the time, a strike craft will actually offer a bigger fleet power bonus than just putting in a weapon slot, for example. And when you have things like decent fleet power, defense stations with decent fleet power, or you have, for example, in the mid game, you have some cruisers or even carrier battleships that have strike craft and improved strike craft over your enemies and or allies, then it's a lot less likely that a computer will get the gumption to attack you, because it'll be like, wow, he's got a pretty powerful fleet. So on and so forth, or for example, wow, his fleet's much more powerful because he already has a couple battleships in it. Meanwhile, I'm still building cruisers and I have not yet reached that level. So natural engineers is actually the better pick. out of these three here, simply because of the options in that tech tree. Agrarian is another pretty good one because it increases food production. And it might sound a little silly, you might be thinking, well, what does food production do? Wouldn't you rather get more minerals or more energy credits so you can, build more stuff all the time? And yeah, that is definitely true, but bigger food production also contributes to the same thing Rapid Breeders does, which is more growth speed. Because I don't know if anybody's noticed, but or if you haven't, then hopefully this makes you aware of it. When your food capacity is full, for example, at the start of the game, your food storage capacity is minimal, so it's only 200. Any food that you generate when you are at full storage contributes towards your pop growth. And as I said with Rapid Breeders, higher pop growth means your pops are growing faster. More pops means your empire is more productive. So bonus food production is not to be scoffed at. So Agrarian is actually a pretty dang good trait to pick, and it synergizes very well with Rapid Breeders, which increases the growth speed, which can increase the growth speed. It gives a flat bonus, and then with Agrarian, once your food is at maximum storage capacity, it can give you a pretty decent bonus to growth speed there as well. Thrifty and Industrious, they're both pretty good picks still. Not entirely terrible. They, again, like I said earlier, these actually have pretty good things that synergize well with other things like some ethics and in particular some civic picks. Like I said, mining guilds goes good with Industrious, and then what was that other one? Corporate Dominion, was it? Yeah, Corporate Dominion. This one goes well with Thrifty because, as I said, they both increase your energy generation. So those are pretty useful. So those can be pretty useful. Intelligent, I would say that this is still one of the top picks, right up there with, say, Rapid Breeders, just about, because this increases science generation across the board. It is definitely more expensive because it requires 2 trait points. It's definitely more expensive than these other natural science bonus ones, because, as I said, it requires 2 trait points, but it synergizes very well with them and can really give you an edge in your research. So we're going to go through through a little bit of the less useful ones, but ones that if you just want to say screw it, you could definitely go for it. Conservationist is not a terrible pick, but I definitely think that there are better ones. Like I said earlier, Natural Engineers, Rapid Breeders, Intelligent, even Agrarian. I think those would be better traits to have than Conservationist, but it's not an entirely terrible pick. Resilient. These give you the biggest bonuses out of any of your trait picks that you could go through. Your garrisoned army health is plus 100%, and your fortification defensive bonus is plus 50% across the board. The problem with this one is it's entirely defensive oriented, and if you're in a situation where your planets are getting invaded, and this trait is actually becoming useful because your garrisons are under attack and stuff and whatnot, you're technically doing something wrong. You're probably kind of losing that war. You should be winning it. So I do not recommend picking this unless you're going for something kind of roleplay-ish, or because your empire is let's say pacifist, where you cannot, or especially fanatic pacifist, where you can only do defensive wars. Then resilient, you might consider incorporating that into your species. Although, similar to Conservationist, there are way better picks. Even Conservationist is a better pick than Resilient. Now, here's 2 very interesting ones: Enduring and Venerable. These increase your leaders' lifespans by a decent margin. 15 years for Enduring, and for Venerable, 75 years. Now, at first glance, there are some advantages to having leaders live a longer time. The first thing that comes to mind is for groups like, for example, your scientists. You have your 3 scientists in your the 3 trees for research, and then you have at least 1, I would say probably about another 3 in science ships exploring the galaxy especially in the early parts of the game. So making them live longer can be useful because you'll have higher level scientists that stick around for a longer period of time, and you won't have to spend your empire's influence in order to recruit more scientists when they start dying off, because that actually, I'm sure that's happened to all of us, where a whole bunch of leaders, namely our scientists, all started dying off right around the same time, and we've been so busy micromanaging stuff with certain edicts and with certain frontier outposts that we've created that we don't have enough influence to replace all of them. So enduring in particular can be useful in that respect in the early portions of the game, because you don't have to worry about that as much. And at first glance, it seems like Venerable would be great for that. However, there is one major downside that a lot of people don't consider, and that's if you get a shitty leader, especially in an authority type like a monarchy, an imperial authority. Essentially, what that means is with your imperial authority, you don't get a new ruler until the ruler dies. So say you get a crappy ruler that is decreasing your naval capacity by, 25% or whatever the negative trait is. You're gonna have that penalty to your naval capacity for a long time, because you picked a trait that increases their lifespan by 75 years. So have fun dealing with that for about 150 years or so. You know what I mean? So hopefully that gives you a better idea of why these picks can just turn around and bite you in the ass. Of course, that's not as much of an issue if you picked an authority like, for example, a democracy. But if you are, say, dictatorial and you get a crappy leader voted in, or you have an imperial authority and the crown prince or crown princess that comes into office and rules your empire has at least 1 or even 2 crappy traits for your empire, you're stuck with them for a long time, unless you completely reform your government, because you have given them a longer lifespan. So enduring is the better pick of the 2, because it's a lot cheaper, and the pros do kind of outweigh the cons. But Venerable, it requires 4 trait points, which means that you have to pick quite a few negative traits in order to compensate for it, and the benefits do not outweigh the costs, not in any way, shape, or form. It's not a bad pick if you are role playing. For example, I made an empire that is literally elves, and one of their traits is Venerable, because they're supposed to be long living. So I picked that for one of them, just for funsies. But Venerable, it's actually kind of a bad pick, and you almost never really want to do it. Here's another one: strong and very strong. So strong isn't too bad. The extra minerals that are generated from that pop is pretty good, but if you're picking strong strictly because of the 5% extra minerals, then just go with industrious, because if you want extra mineral generation, then go with industrious. If you're trying to min-max a little bit and you want both, and you're combining it with, say, the mining guild civic, because you really want to crank up your mineral generation for your native species, then by all means, go ahead and stick with it. Very strong is kind of in the same line as Venerable. It only costs 3 trait points, but still, that's a lot of trait points, and it has to be compensated by several negative picks for 10% extra mineral generation and 40% army damage. The army damage bonus is not nearly as important as the mineral generation, in which case, if you're picking very strong just for the mineral generation, just go with the industrious one. If you're trying to combine both of them, well, that's fine by all means, but the problem with picking very strong is, as I said, it requires a lot of trait points, and the army damage bonus is pretty null and void because you know, the number one way to make sure that your armies will win over enemy armies when either you're being invaded or you're invading another planet is to simply have more armies, and never mind the extra army damage. But if you are combining these two things, if you notice, we're sitting at -3 trait points. So that means you have to pick at least 2 negative things that, in order to compensate for it. So, you know, that would leave you with non-adaptive and, you know, one other thing. For example, maybe sedentary or something, or whatever. Or repugnant, you know. So, I mean, it can be compensated for a lot more easily than venerable. But they're not terribly useful. They're not terribly useful picks. There are definitely better ones out there. These two, talented and quick learners, both of these relate to your leaders. So, you know, new scientists that you recruit, new admirals that you recruit, stuff like that, for example. Now, both of these don't really have much purpose. Like, you can still pick them if you're trying to role play, but if you're trying to min-max, there are way better options than these two, namely the rapid breeders or one of the natural science bonuses, or even intelligent is better than these ones. But if you really want to go with these ones, the pros and cons of picking them: quick learners, 25% extra leader experience gain. In the grand scheme of things, this is largely useless because by the time your leader dies, with this extra experience gain, they've gained maybe one whole extra level by the time they die off. And by extension, talented is largely the same thing. The initial leader skill level bonus in the early game can be somewhat useful because your scientists could research those higher level anomalies a little quicker. But again, the overall benefits of having your leaders start off with extra skill levels doesn't really amount to anything, especially later on. And then here's two that I have actually had some hot takes on: adaptive and extremely adaptive. Both of these, I think, I don't think these should ever be picked. You could go with adaptive if you are trying for a really early game wide empire where you expand very quickly to as many planets as possible, you know, before they're properly built up and have several pops on them and stuff like that. Definitely go with adaptive by all means. I mean, if that's your style of play, then that's on you. Adaptive is a very useful pick for that. On the other hand, extremely adaptive, not so much. It gives you twice the bonus for twice the cost, and like venerable, it requires quite a bit of compensation in order to make up for it. And the other thing too is, because you picked extremely adaptive, you can't pick non-adaptive, which is a borderline negligent pick in order to counteract your good traits. I go with non-adaptive almost all the time when I'm making new empires that I'm actually trying to kind of min-max with, simply because I'm not losing out on very much with lower habitability, early game habitability, because by the mid and late games, there's a whole bunch of technologies that pop up that increase your overall habitability for your native species and for your whole empire. And so in order to completely compensate with extremely adaptive, you have to pick 2 other negative traits, because the only one that gives you back 2 points is non-adaptive. So you have to pick something like decadent and fleeting or something, you know, for example, or deviance and repugnant, you know, things that have less or not a negative impact, for example. So adaptive and extremely adaptive. Go with adaptive if you like playing wide and like expanding very early and would enjoy that extra habitability boost. I personally think that there are way better picks than adaptive, but if that's your kind of play, go for it. Extremely, excuse me, too much talking. One sec. Extremely adaptive, on the other hand, I don't really see any reason to ever pick it unless you are simply trying something for funsies, where you're like, you know what, I'm going to try and expand to as many planets as possible within the first 20 years, 30 years, or something like that, just for funsies, just to see what happens. Well, then by all means, go for it. So that's all the quote-unquote positive, I think that's all the quote-unquote positive traits. Oh, no, never mind, I missed a couple. Communal, I already went over. Nomadic, increased migration speed and reduced resettlement cost. This can be somewhat useful. There are definitely better picks out there, like rapid breeders, because rather than having pops migrate from a planet where they might be on, say, a much more useful, say they're migrating from a grade 3 mining network on one of your oldest core planets that has been built up, and you have improved all the buildings to their maximum level as you've been researching, and you get a pop that migrates from a level 3 mining network to a basic mine on a planet that you just colonized. You're losing out on some production there whenever that happens. So I personally don't really see benefits in increased migration speed. Reduced resettlement cost, kind of, yeah, because if you forcefully resettle pops fairly regularly to try and get your newer planets up and running and getting up to decent production, I can see some use for that. Migration speed, not as much, because it's essentially taking a pop off of a well-developed planet and putting it on a much lesser developed planet. That's how I look at it. On the flip side, though, having a faster migration speed with faster growth speed from, say, for example, rapid breeders, or even from agrarian, where you increase your food production by a decent amount, combined with increased migration speed, well, your newer colonies will get more pops on them much more quickly, allowing you to develop that colony and get it up to a similar production level as your older core worlds. It'll allow you to do that faster. So it's not an entirely bad pick if that's what you're going for. I'm kind of playing devil's advocate, looking at two sides of the coin here. So if the pros sound like they outweigh the cons for you, then by all means, Nomadic is definitely a pick. Me personally, this is strictly my opinion. I don't really like it that much. I would rather just have pops grow as opposed to a pop migrate. But that is 100% my opinion on there. I've actually, in my research, I've actually seen it where a couple people have stressed why Nomadic is actually a decent trait because of that big migration speed bonus, and I can understand where they're coming from. I just don't, and I do agree with that viewpoint. I just don't really like it my own self. Charismatic, ruler opinion impact plus 25. This doesn't really accomplish anything. And especially in an empire like with a democratic authority, where you get a new ruler every 10 bloody years. Extra opinion impact, big deal. This could change very easily. So I don't really see any reason to ever pick charismatic. And then conformists. Conformists is a special trait in a sense that you should never pick this. Why? Because conformist is actually bad. It increases governing ethics attraction by plus 25%, which at first glance might be like, oh yeah, that's pretty good. My empire will very likely stay a fanatic materialist all game throughout the whole entire game. Well, if that's what you want, great. But first off, with conformists, there are way better options to combine with, whatever ethic you want to keep. Especially if you're going fanatic materialist, you should definitely pick other traits that increase your science production. But the other thing too is with conformists, as the game progresses, you do want to be changing your governing ethics as the game progresses. For example, if you do start off as a fanatic materialist and you get to the research levels that you want, You get your battleships with tachyon lances and some strike craft and various other things like point defense and stuff. Like you have all that stuff that you really need. You might not have researched everything that you want, but you're at a level where you have quite a bit of superiority in strictly technology terms over the AI, especially AI that doesn't like you, and you can go to war with them and stomp them. Well, now you want to change your ethic to something more militarist, where you get bonuses to your fire rate, for example, to make it much easier to beat the crap out of them with that fire rate bonus to all your ships. Well, the problem with that is if you have conformists, it's harder to do that because you have increased governing ethics attraction from your native species. So it's more difficult to do that when you're trying to support a militarist. When you're trying to support a militarist faction in your government, and you're trying to suppress a materialist faction within your government, because that materialist faction will still be generating 25% bonus attraction to your native species. So conformist is actually a bad trait to pick, and you should never pick it. Pretty much, especially if you're trying to make an empire that you're pseudo min-maxing. You're trying to make a good empire, I should say. So we're gonna flip now to the quote unquote negative traits, which are the